Hey guys, Adam Rose, Vice President and Senior Loan Officer of Western Ohio Mortgage here in Sydney, Ohio. This is another episode of the Mortgage Guy Podcast, and today we are going to talk about the real estate industry updates that are going to impact you on August 17th. So, we've been talking about this before, the NAR settlement that happened, that kind of hit us for this summer. And there's some different things going on, and it's going to impact buyers and agents and lenders. All right, we can't deny that. It's going to hit us too, a little differently, right? And that's what we're going to discuss today. With the whole buyer-broker agreements, a lot of agencies are already coming out with them. They're starting to enforce it now, kind of getting a little ahead of the game, a week or two. But what's going on there? So buyer-broker agreements, anytime you meet with your agent to go see a house, they're going to have you sign an agreement about, and it talks about compensation, the duties, and you know what is expected of the agent, what is expected of the buyer. They're all going to look a little different, right? Some of them might be property specific, some of them might be for a week, a month, 6 months, you name it. It's all over the map, right? Some people are just doing, leaving it blank, and then depending on the situation with the buyer, it might just be one of those write-ins, right? Like, hey, yeah, I'll show you these 5 properties. So they will vary. So take a look at that. Have a conversation with your agent. Nothing to be scared about. Again, conversation, open dialogue, so you kind of understand what it is, and you can kind of get over that hump. And there's no more advertising on the commissions piece, right? So this was the big thing on NAR settlement. Why everybody kind of got this conception of, oh, well, sellers aren't going to pay buyers agents anymore, right? And we've had these conversations where it's been built into the 6% for the last 50 years or what have you. But nonetheless, they can't advertise that there's any buyer agent or buyer broker compensation for the buyer on the MLS, okay? Cannot be advertised on the MLS. So when the agent's going in, they could be going in blind, showing you a home, not knowing if there's compensation. Why I'm talking about that now? Well, I was talking to an agent just the other day, and they're like, hey, I have a question. And I think we've touched on this before a little bit, is how solid are these pre-approvals going to be? And I said, well, what do you mean? And he says, well, if we go in and we are negotiating on a house and the seller is refusing to pay a buyer's agent, and the deal we put together is just not working, and it just can't make the numbers work, but the buyer agrees to pay me on the settlement statement 1%, 2%, 3% flat fee, whatever it is, right? That's your discussion that you have to have with your consumer. Is this pre-approval going to be good anymore? So that's a good question. I said, well, it really just needs to be a completely open dialogue. So from a realtor standpoint, you might have to play a little lender game, right? So if that arises and you run into a listing that seller is hardcore, not happening, you're not getting paid, your buyer's going to have to pay you. And you have to have that discussion with your buyer, and they say, yeah, I can pay you $6,000. Let's do this. Let's write it up, all right? It's time to start asking questions, all right? Not only should you be asking your lender questions, whoever that lender might be, all right? But you need to talk to the buyer and have that open dialogue. I know it's an awkward situation. You don't really want to ask them these questions because it's not your job to do so. But it could prevent some problems, right? So they say, yeah, sure, I'll pay you $6,000, right? 2% commission. And we'll put it on the settlement statement. We'll settle all at closing. Well, from a buyer standpoint, they think, hey, I've got $6,000 in cash over here. No problem at all. I'll pay him. Well, more than likely, a brokerage is not going to accept cash payment. It's going to be on the settlement statement and all built into the buyer's cash at the closing table. And if the buyer thinks they're just going to use this $6,000 in cash, well, if you recall, depositing cash into your bank account for validating you have enough assets to close is kind of a problem unless we can document where it comes from, right? So that's a conversation you may be wanting to have with that buyer is, all right, how much money do we have saved in the bank? What's this look like? Can you pay it officially? Yes or no? We can't use mattress money, money in the safe, all right? None of that. That's going to be a problem. And as a buyer, that is something that you need to take into consideration as well when you're having these conversations. Be open to having that dialogue with your agent and make sure you call your lender, right? We have your bank statements. We have validated your assets. We know how much you have to play with. Maybe there's an option to reduce down payments, change up the game on the lending side a little bit, depending on your loan program, to make sure everything is addressed and squeezed in, so we're not getting into contract, we're not paying for an inspection and paying for an appraisal, getting halfway through this process, not thinking about the buyer's agent commission, because that's something that we're going to have to get used to, making sure we're paying attention in the contracts, how this is being stated, right? Because that's something that could be very easily missed. We're so used to these contracts, purchase price, closing costs, yes or no, closing dates, all that. All right, we're disclosing. So we got to pay attention to this as well. We don't want to get halfway through this process and get a prelim closing disclosure and you needed $6,000 more than what we anticipated and what we verified. That's going to be a problem. So agents, buyers, make sure you have an open line of communication. Don't be embarrassed by it. Be professional. It's fine. Think of the whole doctor situation. You tell your doctor all sorts of stuff. Well, you're going to have to tell us too. All right, so be open about it. And we can prevent a lot of potential issues that could arise from it. So that was a great question from that agent. And if other agents out there have that same concern, just make sure you're reaching out, talking with the buyer, talking with the lender, and we can figure something out. We just don't want to get caught with our pants down, right? Last thing we want to do, especially since we specialize in government lending and a lot of USDA financing, we got a no down payment borrower, and we're sending out a pre-approval letter. You're going to negotiating, and then we get this contract. You didn't ask for closing costs, and now the buyer's paying you. I'm not sure how that's going to work, right? So open lines of communication. Make sure everyone is on the same page when it comes to the broker compensation, and we won't have any problems, really, right? So that's the big update for this week, guys. That's coming down the pike. Again, August 17th is the effective date, but most of the brokerages out there are starting to get into that mode of doing it now instead of just using that hard date. So don't be surprised if you go look at a house and you're signing a buyer-broker agreement, all right? So make sure you're just having a conversation, all right? Don't be standoffish about it or think that you don't have to sign one. All brokerages are doing it now. So that's your update for this week, guys. I hope that information was helpful. Remember, subscribe on YouTube. Check us out on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and we will catch you all next week.